Testing. Good
Testing.
evening, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Nivetan Analaki Rajarajan. I'm a student at Malaysia University of Science and Technology, studying my diploma in law enforcement. Today we are joined by Dr. Kamni Samugaya, Head of School of Law Enforcement at MUST, and Professor Azrini Wahidin from the University of Sydney, to discuss the topic illuminating the black box, exploring the role of AI in the criminal justice system in Malaysia. To officially begin our program, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Kamini to deliver the opening remark and welcome us to the event. Dr. Kamini, thank you for joining us.
Great meeting you again, Prof. Thank you so much for your time, your precious time, for agreeing for this wonderful session on the role of AI with criminal justice system. So the importance of AI, because usually people do not relate AI with law, but you have come up with a very innovative way of looking at role of AI in criminal sentencing, especially the perspective of in Malaysia. I'm so thankful, and I'm also very thankful to the SEAD collaboration with the School of Law Enforcement and welcoming such a, a very well-known, prominent professor as you in the field of AI and law. So I wish you and also our team all the best in conducting a wonderful session today and also a thought-provoking session today. Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much for being here today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Kamini, for those warm and thoughtful opening remarks. And now, without further ado, let's move on to the main part of today's session. We are very pleased to have with us Professor Azrini Wahidin from the University of Sydney. Professor Wahidin is a professor of sociology and criminal justice and is the former head of the School of Social and Political Science at the University of Sydney. She has worked in many areas including criminal justice, prisons, aging, gender, human rights, and peace building. More recently, she has focused on how artificial intelligence could change the way decisions are made in the justice system. So before we get into important questions surrounding AI, sentencing, and the future of criminal justice, I thought it would be interesting for our audience to first get to know the person behind the research. So Professor Wahidin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Terima kasih. Thank you.
Alright, so Professor, before we talk about AI and criminal sentencing, could you tell us a little about your journey into the field of criminal justice? What first drew you to this area of research?
Let me begin by saying thank you very much to Dr. Kamini for inviting me and Send for the opportunity to talk about AI in the criminal justice
Yeah.
system. Just briefly, my kind of journey started because I was always interested in understanding why social injustice exists and how we can challenge it and alleviate issues within our society that causes inequality. So I studied sociology at Goldsmiths College, University of London, and I was very fortunate to have some fantastic, inspiring lecturers who, such as Nicholas Rose, who's a Foucauldian, Caroline Ramzanoglu, feminist theorist, Paul Gilroy, looking at race and racism and how we should decolonise the curriculum. Then I moved to I got scholarships to do my PhD under the wonderful supervision of a number of people in the area of gerontology, social policy, sociology, criminology and criminal justice. But before I forget, I did my master's also in criminology and criminal justice at Keele University under the supervision of a wonderful individual called Professor Pat Carlin, who wrote
Oh.
one of the classic texts on women in prison in the 1980s. Her book was published in 1983. And from that, although, and I think this is really important for students to be able to marry kind of theory and policy. And I've always wanted and been interested in unsilencing or bearing witness to inequality, discrimination, abuses of power. And the worst example you can find is in the prison system, where voices are unheard, they're hard to reach group, they bring a number of kind of complex kind of issues, and the prison system is unable to really support people to become law-abiding citizens.
Well, Professor, that's quite a long journey for you. In the book you talk about, I'm sure the book is quite interesting, right? You read in 1983.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
that was Pat Carlin's book, and then from that I wrote a series of books. My first book being Old Women in the Criminal Justice System.
Oh.
And then a series of other books, and then my most latest one looked at ex-combatants, gender and peace.
Oh, in Northern Ireland.
That's right.
That's quite an interesting book.
And that brings in socio-legal studies, peace and conflict, law enforcement,
All right.
colonial power, and how people, especially women, played an important role moving from conflict to peace.
Okay, Professor. Well, I heard you have worked across areas ranging from prison and aging to gender, peace building, and now artificial intelligence. Looking back at your career, is there a particular experience or piece of research that has shaped the way you think about justice today?
I think it's a combination of your political beliefs, and I'm kind of political beliefs, and I'm driven by the real kind of principle of addressing inequality and bringing about change for society, optimizing people's potential, creating a society for all. We are one nation, one people, regardless to age, color, race.
Yes, exactly. Because that's what's happening in Malaysia, right? The racism. So that's what we all wanted as a human. We all want changes and peace.
Yeah.
So let's dive deeper into the black box questions. Professor, your topic used the phrase illuminating the black box. For someone who may not be familiar with the term, what exactly is the black box when we talk about AI in criminal justice?
I mean, first of all, we have to think about the nature of how privatization is sweeping into criminal justice practices. And we have to question whether it is appropriate for private companies, because that's what privatization is buying into state-owned, state-owned facilities, to have a hand in the criminal justice system, which is about due process, transparency, fairness, equity before the law. And that's what I believe in. Yeah, all of us, equity before the law. So in terms of the black box, what it refers to is the fact that a system has been created. Yeah, an algorithmic system has been created in which it is opaque to public scrutiny. And that means we are unable to untangle how these algorithms operate. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
So these algorithms are in essence an informal decision-making process. system, right?
Oh,
And so it's difficult to understand how these weightings have been agreed upon. Yeah. Who's made those decisions? Are they accurate? So, a question I would like to kind of raise is, why do we see, when we're using Compass, which is an algorithmic tool mainly used in the States to assist with sentencing decisions,
yeah. It can be complicating also.
that the weightings, the output for like cases, decides disproportionately that young Afro-Americans should receive a custodial sentence rather than a community sentence compared to their white counterparts.
Okay, thanks, Professor.
So, simply put, currently these algorithms are, and how these decision processes is currently not under, I would argue, enough scrutiny, which leads to a lack of understanding of how these processes work. It's opaque, so it's surrounded by a level of mystery, and that when one wants to unravel and look into that box to understand how these decision-making processes come about, we're unable to, because the law protects proprietary organizations.
Alright. Okay, thank you very much for the answer about the black box, Professor. I'm gonna ask you for the next topic about AI and criminal sentencing. So Malaysia has been exploring and implementing AI assistant tools in its criminal justice system. From your research, what role is AI currently expected to play in the sentencing process?
I think that's a fantastic and thoughtful question. As you know, around 2020, Malaysia saw the first rollout of AI in the criminal justice systems with the assistance tool, with the development of ICOS and AISS in Sabah and Sarawak for two main offences: drug offences and sexual offences, in particular rape. To date, with the 140-page national kind of roadmap for AI by the Malaysian government and the Ministry of Digital, which I think is really important to refer to, we are beginning to see the incorporation at a rapid rate, of the e-filing system, case management system, e-review of online case management, e-bidding, virtual hearings, e-judgment, and kind of digital certificates, just to name a few. And what we're also seeing is the development of various kind of assisted tools to help legal firms decide on, to quicken the pace of creating kind of summaries of precedent cases, if that makes sense. So what we have begun to see is really quite an interesting private third-party rollout of tools such as LexisNexis, I'm just bringing up the whole list of kind of tools that are being used currently in Malaysia. And each of these platforms are really quite interesting because they have different levels of access dependent on how much you're willing to pay. So, for example, in Malaysia, we have, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, Ask Alia. We have AI chatbots, which specializes in labor law. We have Easy Pro Soft legal accounting software, Co-Counsel, Lexis Plus AI with Protege. These are just some of the platforms that we're beginning to see that are very much state-of-the-art personalized AI assistants designed and is transforming legal work in Malaysia. But there is a trade-off. And then, as I mentioned, we have all these tools within the criminal justice system, like the e-filing, case management system, queue management, court recording and transcription system, legal search engines, chat boxes. Yeah.
Okay.
But how can a small firm, emerging firm, compete with large corporate firms that can invest in a digitally enabled not only workforce but infrastructure? And how will these kind of tools change the nature of legal practice?
Okay, Professor, but I would like to address the common concern that AI is taking all the jobs. That's what they say. In the context of the judiciary, there is a growing apprehension that AI could eventually replace judges. Is this a realistic possibility? Or should we instead view AI as a tool that support and enhance judicial decisions making while preserving the essential role of human judgment?
I mean, that's a really interesting question in the sense that 25 years ago, for example, I'm quite an old academic now. When I came to university about 25 plus years ago, we didn't have computers. So in my early 20s, teenage years, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have, we had dot matrix when I yeah, we didn't have, we had to write. I mean, it was very much, a kind of process of learning where we read and we wrote. Whereas nowadays we've made that transition to, to writing straight onto a computer. My students don't take in a pen and paper. They take in their laptops. Years ago, we had we are entering a fourth, revolution, industrial revolution. But there was a time where, people didn't have calculators and people thought that calculators would replace accountants. What we are seeing is more an increased use of AI, and data scientists are fantastically kind of innovative and have created prototypes of kind of smart courts. They've created, cars that no longer need drivers. They have employed AI kind of avatars, and we've seen that in China, where for certain cases, we have a judge called Judge Bo, who deals with only certain kind of low risk, low offending offences. I would say that, who can foretell the future? But what I can be assured of is that it will always be important within the legal practice to keep humans in the loop. to keep us in the loop, to oversee the kind of nuances at this point in the kind of life cycle of AI, in which the kind of neuro pathways and the large, the LLMs are unable at this point really to encapsulate the kind of complexity of the human. Whether they will take over people's jobs, I think the evolution of our relationship with the means of production and will change over time. That's what history has demonstrated. But for me, there is an emphasis, especially within the judiciary, to ensure that the human is kept in the loop, and that I will always have a preference for human decision making over computerized decision making assisted tools. I really think it's about finding a balance between the two, and not to be driven by fear of the unknown, but to embrace what AI, with the appropriate guidelines, training and governance procedures, can actually do to help us create a fairer, more just criminal justice system. So it's not just keeping humans in the loop, it's actually keeping humans over the loop. So that means kind of monitoring outcomes and intervening when necessary, especially in high-risk settings.
Okay. The change has been drastic. Now, if we see a student without a laptop or smartphone, it is not normal actually for this generation right now. So let's move on to the next point, the human element. At the end of the day, sentencing is a human decision involving circumstances, context, and individual judgment. What happens when we introduce an algorithm into that process? What does the flow of usage look like?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Okay. What happens when we introduce an algorithm into that process? What does the flow of usage look like?
Yeah, the flow. Well, from the very, we have to understand that the criminal justice system has already used artificial intelligence in supporting the workflow outputs. From police, we've got the kind of body cameras. We have I'm sure most of you refer back to ChatGPT or similar packages to support your learning or knowledge about or further exploration of kind of issues that you want to kind of unearth or understand. So the kind of notion of artificial is that it's artificial, it's not real, it's constructed by us in the first, which is first and foremost something to kind of consider. It will change the nature of how we work, because the mode of production, if we think about Marxism and our relation to that mode of production, is changing. So what we need to ensure is that we regulate and govern how technologies are used, why they're used in a certain way, and prioritize and emphasize the importance that these are assisted tools. And your kind of questions is important because it raises not only opportunities for the society we live in and for the criminal justice, high stake operations, yeah. But it also raises, for me, complex ethical and legal dilemmas in the move to, or in this transition to, creating and developing what will become known as smart justice. So what are the regulatory inroads that must be in place to protect civil liberties? How do we limit algorithmic kind of opacity? And how do we ensure that private companies and government agencies involved in deploying AI tools within the criminal justice system are at all times responsible and accountable?
My next question is to follow up on your answer. If AI cannot understand the full human circumstances behind a crime, what happens when its recommendation is different from what the judge think it's right? Can a judge's own judgment make up for what the AI cannot understand?
I mean, what we have to avoid is what's called as cognitive offloading.
Okay.
And we have to understand kind of what is the motivation for using these types of technologies in health, in banking, aviation, yeah, high risk settings. So kind of in response to your question, we really need to think about how we maintain our understanding of justice in the age of AI. What do we understand by that? Yeah. How do we amplify justice rather than amplify injustice? And I think that is the kind of crucial nexus, and that is the tension that we are kind of confronted with, because algorithms are based on data that is inputted by humans based on precedent. So in relation to the question in regards to sentencing, and currently in Sabah and Sarawak, judges have demonstrated discretion, and in that they don't generally follow the recommendations made by the AI assisted tool. And we can see that very much in the case of State versus Modeli, which I think you will be familiar, your colleagues will be familiar with, where, and I'll give you a quick case summary, where a young man was of 43 years of age, was arrested on drug offences, in which the judge in Sabah and Sarawak argued that the AI tool recommendation was not appropriate for this particular case. Yeah, it was the High Court case of Dennis Modili versus public prosecutor. And what's really interesting about this case is that this 43-year-old was accused and charged and convicted by the magistrate for possession of 0.01 gram of methamphetamine under Section 12/2 of the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1952. And this charge was brought on the 16th of December 2019. The magistrate court magistrate decided, if I remember rightly, that The offence under Section 12 was to run concurrently under another charge under Section 15. 10 months was recommended by the algorithm. But the judge decided a slightly higher recommendation. So it eventually went to a court of appeal and it was reduced to 6 months, and no reason was given for that reduction. But what is known, research has shown that there's a recommended percentage derived from kind of an AI outcome, and it's within those guidelines that a judge will either agree in totality or with the AI recommendation or not. And so what we saw with Dennis P. Madilli case is that the judge didn't agree with the recommendation, and so judicial discretion was preserved.
What's happening, the case that's happening in Sabah, Sarawak is quite an interesting case actually, from what the injustment they are doing between the AI and the judge decision actually. So yeah. So to understand why the AI model is making such decisions, how is the current AI model used in the judicial system being trained for service? When the AI system makes a sentencing recommendation, is it trained on historical cases and previous judicial decisions? Or is it making its recommendation solely based on the provisions and principles of the law?
It's based on previous cases, and to date, to date, judges in Sabah and Sarawak have departed from AI-assisted sentencing recommendations in 67% of all cases. And that's a really interesting percentage, because at this current point, judges are demonstrating that they are deviating from assisted AI recommendations, and the question for me would be why.
That's a quite interesting question that I would like to know too. But one of the biggest concerns surrounding AI in the criminal justice is algorithmic bias. If an AI system learn from historical criminal justice data, could it unintentionally reproduce the bias that already exists within the system?
Well, research has demonstrated that, as I've kind of referred to earlier in our discussion, that algorithm, the kind of black box, is a proprietary product, with inbuilt statistical bias. Now, what's interesting is that over time, as more cases are being kind of fed into the system, and the database becomes larger and larger, eventually, these kind of patterns that will form a kind of new development in computational kind of justice, which is where the computer actually develops neural pathways in which they can actually determine the outcome based on large kind of summaries of cases. And I was interviewing one person for this. Well, I'm not going to mention this person's name, but a number of judges and magistrates, data scientists use this term, garbage in, garbage out, which means that if you input data that has inbuilt statistical bias, then that will be amplified, replicated in the outcomes. And that's why there is a need to kind of open up this black box, place a level of governance and scrutiny over the algorithms, and create what's become known as the glass box. And remember, people are not numbers. So we don't operate in binaries. And the questions in law is not just simply yes or no. So there is a problem, I would argue, of applying mathematical principles to law, where nuances and subtleties in individual cases are important. So one question, for example, was a question from an algorithm was, and it's kind of worded not word for word in this way, but do rape victims suffer from psychological distress? The question is not simply yes or no, but that's what the algorithm wanted. I would argue, as a kind of feminist criminologist, that all rape victims suffer from psychological distress. So the question then that has to be raised is how do we recognise that lack of nuance in AI? But remember, AI assisted sentencing, they are assistants to help, to assist, not to supplement judicial, judges' decisions.
Right. Until the AI is capable of making better decisions, who should be responsible if an AI assistant recommendation turns out to be wrong or unfair? The developer of the model, the institution, the judge, or someone else?
The state has a responsibility to ensure that justice is upheld. The question for me is that with adequate regulation, adequate training, transparency, we build confidence, we build literacy, AI literacy with criminal justice practitioners to understand how algorithmic justice can be used for the benefit of society. It should be used to serve to society for its betterment, to eliminate bias, to eliminate judicial unfairness, and in turn, in an ideal world, prevent miscarriages of justice. But we also know, realistically, bias within the systems, are not easily extracted, because machine learning algorithms need assumptions and bias to function.
Yes. Speaking of transparency, do you think AI create a need for a new layer of accountability that our existing legal framework aren't necessarily prepared for?
I think my own view, based on the research, is that AI is developing so quickly. It's rapid. It's becoming more powerful. It's becoming it's having more functions. And yet, kind of governance procedures, policy, and practice hasn't actually caught up with that rapid development. So as humans and as society changes and how technology has evolved, and as we become more reliant on the use of technology, I believe that the landscape of law enforcement practices will inevitably change too. But we can't allow any form of technology to go unregulated, because if it does, especially in high-risk settings, it will pose a serious threat to the rule of law in a domain that was once wholly led by humans.
People don't like to move at such a fast pace. Do
That is
you,
true.
yeah, do you think the public will be comfortable knowing that AI had played, sorry, what will it take for both legal professionals and the public to trust AI in criminal justice?
I think it goes back to the question, it goes back to the kind of fundamentals of what our understanding of law is. How do we protect human rights? Because all of us are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. And that's taken from the human rights under Article 7 of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, sorry. So that's our belief, and we have to work towards how we become more transparent, how we move away from the black box to the glass box, how we educate and consciousness kind of raise amongst all members of society, the kind of all members of society, how technology is changing our relationships to the means and modes of production. And I think education, transparency will build confidence, legitimacy, and it has to be co-produced. It can't just be produced by data scientists or led by government agendas. There has to be kind of layers of governance to ensure that algorithms are, or assisted sentencing recommendations do not amplify the systemic layers of discrimination that is currently inherent in our system to date.
Now I like to focus more on the fact that Malaysia has become a case study. Why is Malaysia such an interesting case study for understanding AI in criminal justice?
Because it's at the forefront of, I believe, of AI development in criminal justice settings. I mean, what's exciting about Malaysia is that it rolled out AI-assisted sentencing in Sabah and Sarawak for 2 offences. It's now being rolled out onto the peninsula, and what you see is a kind of gradual increase in types of offences that are being used. And the kind of fundamental kind of driver behind the rollout in Malaysia, which is at the kind of forefront of this type of use in Southeast Asia, excluding China, of course, is that this is a really exciting time. We're at this transition point where we are moving from a system that we've been embedded into a kind of new, fluid, faster process in which the key driver is to alleviate the burden of the backlog of cases. So, the Chief Justice of the Federal Court in Malaysia in 2019, Tun Malajam, was the one who announced the implementation of AI in sentencing to minimize, one, the disparity in sentencing decision, and secondly, to address the backlog of cases, which it very much has done.
So, since you say Malaysia is at the forefront, what can Malaysia potentially teach other countries about introducing AI into the justice system?
Malaysia, in terms of its kind of cultural context, its history its political history is extremely unique. In terms of other countries, well, we've just seen the AI European Act that's come out. Malaysia has just established a Ministry of Digital. It has just published its roadmap for 26 to 2030. It has the criminal kind of review that's ongoing. I think, personally, any country, and in particular, we're focusing on Malaysia, is to look at how we can look at the wider sphere of work that's going on in this field, look at the kind of regulations, statutes that are in place, and provide and construct and develop, guidelines that reflect the kind of richness of with the richness of the people in Malaysia and the kind of visions, principles that are enshrined in the law there. I think it's an exciting time in which Malaysia can be the leading country in the development of AI governance, procedures and protocols globally.
I would like to look a little into the future. If AI becomes increasingly integrated into criminal justice, what safeguards do you believe need to be in place before we allow these systems to play a greater role?
There has to be a huge amount of resources invested in educating members of any society into the use of AI. And China is very interesting at the moment. It's made the use of AI mandatory from primary school onwards. Yet we are seeing in some countries, and I've volunteered in places like Kenya, where I've seen schools without electricity, without running water. So there are places where the digital infrastructure is lacking. And if we're not careful, we are going to widen the gap between the global majority and the global north. So what we're going to
Speaking of educating those involved, what skills do judges, lawyers, and other criminal justice practitioners need to develop as AI becomes part of their work?
Exactly. I mean, to date, and I can draw an example from myself, I haven't been taught about how to use AI ethically. I haven't been taught to use AI. Yeah. And I'm talking about really basic things like ChatGPT or Siri or yeah. And I know when banking online became the norm, I was quite resistant. So what you have is you've got the early adopters, you've got those who are what we call AI averse, and we've got those people who want to learn but really don't know how to. So the question really goes back to the point that many bar councils and lawyers are making, that we really need to the younger generation. It will be much easier to make this transition because they're more familiar with how technology operates, works. But saying that, we can't take for granted the fact that these technologies in high-risk settings can have huge consequences in terms of either giving somebody liberty or denying somebody liberty. When we know that, like the compass tool incorrectly kind of predicts reoffending rates for certain races, yeah. We know that facial recognition discriminates against people of colour. If we're using data that's based on historical data, we know that there's, generalizability has led to kind of racial profiling. So for me, and I'm going to kind of quote from the work of Pamela Ugwedite in 2023, she argues that algorithms can reproduce the biased assumptions that low-income locations heavily populated by racialized people are the areas most exposed to crime risk. And I agree with her. So if we're linking already, if algorithmic assumptions are linking race to crime, this will fuel discriminatory geographical profiling.
I kind of agree with her too, actually. But thank you, Professor, for the insightful answer. I would like to wrap up the session with one final question for you. Looking 10 years ahead, what do you hope the relationship between AI and human decisions makers in criminal justice will look like?
I would hope that we would be better educated. We would improve our digital literacy will have improved, not just for a certain group, but for all of us. Everyone needs the same level of not only knowledge but also accessibility. Yeah, but in a society where people are still going without food, in a society where there is poverty, injustice, climate injustice, how is it going to be possible for societies to operate equally within a criminal justice system in which all systems need and should be able to talk to each other, in where people understand how to use these systems, and secondly, that we have faith and confidence that the system will be kind of fair. I don't think as the criminal justice system moves towards greater integration of AI-enabled technologies, we really do have to understand its development, its adoption, and its enforcement, and the only way we can ensure that is to make sure that we do have a code of ethics, we do have really strict, robust, transparent governance procedures. We need frameworks to ensure that AI providers, developers, operators adhere to the principles of fairness, transparency, accountability, human rights. And I think without these that level of competency, I think the use of AI will come with it kind of significant risks. So it is fundamental that we are reminded constantly that these tools are just tools, yeah, to help us create a more equitable system that speaks to fairness, accountability, responsibility, justice.
Thank you very much, Professor Wahidin, for sharing your time, knowledge, and valuable insight with us today. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us and engage with our students and audience. We hope to have the opportunity to welcome you back to MEST in the future for another insightful session. To everyone who joined us today, thank you for being part of this discussion. We hope that you have gained a better understanding of opportunities, challenges, and important questions surrounding the use of AI in criminal justice, particularly in the context of Malaysia. We will also like to extend our sincere appreciation to Malaysia University of Science and Technology for making today's session possible. With that, we have come to an end of today's session. Thank you everyone and have a wonderful evening. Alright, thank you.